Well, given all of the news for the last several days, I pretty much can guess exactly what your thoughts were when you woke up this morning. If you've been watching the show for a long time, without question, you were wondering, where is my robotic, cybernetic, fully articulated artificial tail? And why has it taken so long to get here? Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is your latest from the wonderful world. Today, our adventure will take place in Futureland. And we have a couple of interesting inventions for you to put as little milestones on the way to our cybernetic future of Ripley with the power loader and aliens, which I await on a daily basis. It turns out, Steve, that a number of Japanese researchers have created something which on initial glance just seems absolutely ridiculous. It is an automatic, robotic, computer-controlled tail for humans. And you look at this thing, you go, this is nuts. But their point is that tails are very useful for counterbalancing. That's why cats have them. And you remember the old days of T-Rex when, oh, you may not remember, but when I was growing up, T-Rex's tail, he dragged it behind him on the ground. You know, there was no reason for him to have it until they realized it was to balance him out. Well, this tail is useful for helping humans balance things like picking up loads and going up stairs and keeping balance for maybe elderly people. And it turns out it's actually a pretty neat idea. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you want yours with the shiny finish or the matte finish? Because I don't see how anybody's going to get by without an artificial tail at some point in the very near future.
Well, number one, I want it at a flesh tone. Number two, I want it to tan at the exact same rate as the rest of my skin, so it just always looks fabulous and matchy with the rest of me. Wouldn't that be great? Actually, what I'm here to do right now is to totally dispel your love for the robot tail, Bill, because essentially it's a segue for your butt, and we all know this. It's exactly what it is. No, all kidding aside, this is one of those things where you go, no, why would I need that? But then you start thinking about it, and it would be incredibly useful. I think I mentioned a couple of segments ago that I took my kids on our annual camping trip up to the mountains here in Colorado. We were just outside of Buena Vista. You're up at 9,600 feet, but my kids aren't big enough to be very useful yet, right? I've got to load all this stuff on the top of the SUV. I've got the basket that fits in the trailer hitch, and I got to load all that up. And if I could have some sort of a lift loading tail to help me out with that, I can't tell you. I mean, here we are. We've been home for 2 days, and the small of my back is still just a little tender from all the lifting and twisting and pushing stuff up and hauling stuff down and all the rest. I think those would be fabulous. There are just there are a couple of things I want to know. Does this thing have any kind of sensory feedback so that you can tell when it's working? Is there like a signal that goes to your brain?
I did not get that it is receptive to inputs, that it's basically just controlled by an output. So the computer is doing the balancing, but I'm not aware that it has sensors to detect when it touches anything. Furry's hardest hit, by the way.
Right.
So I don't think that the robotic cybernetic tail that I've been waiting for is particularly sensitive.
The reason I ask is, number one, I don't want to feel any pain when I do this, and I'm certainly going to get the extended warranty because I'm a big enough klutz that pretty much anytime I close a door in my house or my car or I lean back in my recliner, that thing is going to get snapped in half. Is my biggest fear, because we were created or evolved, whatever your opinion is on that, to be upright creatures with no tails. And what's going to be the learning curve on figuring out exactly where that thing is so you don't damage it, or if it eventually does, and I assume it eventually would have to have some sort of sensory feedback, into the brain of the user. Are we going to actually hurt ourselves when we smash our tails?
I don't know. It's been my experience that my $300,000 tail I break or snap in the first 5 or 6 days, but the little cheap $20,000 tails that I buy, I just seem to last forever. I don't know how to explain that.
It's hard to remember where you left them, so you have to buy like 5 of them.
Yeah.
Exactly right. That's why they call them cheaters. Hey, Scotty, the cyber story doesn't end there, because in a related story, and this is a work of art, and art is actually very important. I'm not being funny here now. I'm serious as I can be. A lot of times, artists will be able to demonstrate something, given the state of technology, that shows you things in a new way. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen those guys dancing in the LED suits, but it's just phenomenal. It's a phenomenal art form expression. And technically what we saw was a number of cybernetic devices that volunteers put on. They got out on stage. It's controlled by wires. And then the guy behind the console, the DJ basically, is controlling the movements of the human dancers because the arm movements anyway, because he's controlling what the arms are doing. And the effect is precisely the same as you would get on a marionette. And by weird coincidence, just a couple days ago, I saw Pinocchio for the first time in 50 years or something. And, that whole business, I got no strings to hold me down, is kind of a nice deal. There's something alarming about that clip. And I can't put my finger on it, but it does come down to who's in control of this thing, I think.
I immediately thought this is our progressive future. This is when we have ceded control of even our own bodies to other people that they can determine how we move, and certainly want us to move in synchronization with all the other implements of state. Yeah, and this is clever and cute as a piece of art, but it's also open to interpretation, and I don't have to interpret it the way the artist intended it. And I'm sure the artist did not intend it the way that I see it. But I think this whole idea, when you said, oh, well, they put on these cybernetic things on their arms voluntarily. Well, voluntarily now, in the initial thing, when they say, hey, do you want the chip? You want to have the chip under your skin. It'll help in case you ever get lost, or, it'll help in case we have to give you an injection at an accident and we don't know whether you're allergic to something. And why don't we just put the chip in now, that subcutaneous chip? I'm not being too dystopian or apocalyptic in my thinking here to suggest that there are people who would see that scene and say, now, wouldn't that be great? I mean, this is like the soldiers in Star Wars that fight for the evil side. I'm not like you guys who
stormtroopers.
Yes, thank you.
Imperial stormtroopers.
So thank you for supplying the language that I lack. But this is like those guys who essentially have a hive mind, and they're all being sort of directed. I don't even know if it's the stormtroopers. Who were all the soldiers that were with Boba Fett's group? In the one movie,
Clones?
Yeah, the clones, the Attack of the Clones, yeah. And I've seen several science fiction things where basically if you can get to that kill switch where you can shut off the computer that's directing all of their actions, they all kind of collapse and fall down. It's not that bad yet. I don't think that we should take this all, so seriously as I'm indicating, but it's this kind of thing that there are some designing people who will look at and go, you know what? Just the idea of that tail thing, Bill. I mean, we're actually making a robotic thing. For those of you who believe in natural selection and Darwinian evolution, we're actually making an advanced tool to go backwards on the evolutionary progression. Think about that.
If I understand your argument correctly, what you're saying is the power assist you get from volunteers wearing cybernetic arms allows them to more easily subdue those people who do not want to wear cybernetic arms. Is that what I'm basically?
I think that's the trajectory.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, speaking of trajectories, there are milestones in history, and sometimes they're very obvious, and sometimes not so obvious. But one of the big milestones in aviation history happened very early, very shortly after the Wright brothers, when was it Louis Blériot? I want to say it was Louis, but Blériot was his name. He flew a monoplane from France to England, crossed the English Channel in a ragwing wooden skeleton flying contraption with maybe 12, 15 horsepower engine, and it was really quite a feat at the time. He probably averaged, if I had to guess, I'd say maybe 40 miles an hour or something like that. Well, just a few days ago, somebody using another one of these high-tech devices was able to cross the channel in a lot less time than that, because he did it at 90 miles an hour, about 5 feet above the surface of the water, and he did it on an actual honest-to-God hoverboard. Essentially, what he did was he had a jet engine that he was standing on, and using his center of gravity, by leaning forward, backwards, and sideways, he could pivot the thrust of this jet engine And I watched this clip and I thought, my God, where's the fuel coming from? It's in his backpack. That's got to be it. And he flew the English Channel without an airplane, just like we're supposed to be doing 30 years ago. So even though the progress is slower than we would have thought, sometimes there is progress. So I know that my adventures using my hoverboard as I fly across the Atlantic Ocean will be enhanced by the stability I will get from the robotic tail. And if I have to swim back to London from the middle of the Atlantic, those cybernetic arms will provide the kind of assistance I think that would be necessary for me to swim the 1,100 miles needed for me to make it back to safety. So as far as I can see, all of our bases are covered and everything is looking just rosy. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com, who decided that these members-only show were important enough to get out there to be seen by all the other people out there. This episode certainly proves they were mistaken in that regard. But in any event, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Right Angle.